I think the biggest risk is really not actually starting now. And
Mhm.
a lot of people wait for the perfect time or for the conditions to be totally right.
Thanks for joining us today, Doug.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Sarah.
I've been just looking forward to this topic. I've been an entrepreneur for almost a decade. I was with the year turning over. I'm like, wow, I've been doing this almost 10 years. And I've seen so many changes in both just like entrepreneurship and specifically what it looks like to own a therapy practice. And to me, it feels like the rate of change is increasing more and more each year. Like now it feels like I get to the end of one year and I'm like, time to start a new business. Like it
Yeah.
just feels like it's changing that quickly. So, yeah, I'm just excited to talk about 2023 and what you're seeing out there. But before we get there, I want to talk just a little bit about you and hear your story of how you got involved with helping OTs start private practices.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for having me. So
Mhm.
I'll kind of rewind it a little bit. So my wife and I, we started the functional pelvis in 2014 in New York City, which was the first pelvic floor therapy practice ran by an OT in New York City. And really have to go back to like 2013 because that's when Lindsay and I really started to discuss things. And at the time, it's kind of interesting. Our kid was 1 years old at the time. And my wife, she was working in an outpatient setting. She loved her job, she loved her boss, but she was constantly feeling like she was having to choose between her job on one hand and then really being present with our kid. And at the time, we were planning on having our second kid, and we could just kind of imagine that things weren't going to get better, right? They were just going to get worse. And with two kids in daycare, we were really coming to the conclusion that we would spend all of this time away from work, away from our kids
Mhm.
to be able to pay for daycare fees for someone to take care of our kids. And it was this real sort of completely crazy cycle where you would have to go to work to pay off your student loan, to pay for childcare, not see your kid, and then kind of repeat the cycle. And it just started to really seem crazy to us. And
Mhm.
with her working for someone else, it would be impossible to take days off if she wanted to volunteer at the school or be class parent. And so we started to talk about how we could change things and how we could get more control in both like our professional life and our personal life. And the more we discussed it, the more I think it really became apparent that we needed to just open up our own practice. And our thinking was at the time was like having our own practice that would give us more freedom, more flexibility to choose a schedule that really worked for our family because that's what was important to us. And it's true to an extent that you are more in control when you're the boss. But then I started looking into things, and the further I looked into it, it really became apparent that like one of the many reasons why OTs become burned out is due to high productivity standards, right? Due to documentation requirements. And these are all imposed by insurance companies. And not to mention, like insurance companies decide ultimately how much you get reimbursed. And that directly impacts how many clients you need to see a day, how many need to see a week and a month. So our thought process at that time really changed. And we were like, let's not just open any practice, let's open a private pay practice. Because with a private pay practice, we kind of get to bring OT and I think healthcare back to its foundations because we get to see a client for 1 hour at a time. You don't have all of the same documentation requirements, and we know exactly what we're going to earn. And my
Mhm.
wife could just focus on providing the best care for her clients, being fairly compensated for it, and not have to really deal with any of that insurance bureaucracy that consumes so much of time outside of sessions. So we started to create the functional pelvis, right, which was that first pelvic floor practice in New York City ran by an OT. But and Sarah, you know this, like in OT school, they don't teach you any business skills, right?
Nothing.
And
Yeah.
back in 2014, there really wasn't anyone to learn from either. So we had to figure everything out literally for ourselves. And my wife just wanted to focus on the client care aspect.
Mhm.
So then that meant I went to figuring out all of the business side of things. And at the time, I was working for large investment banks in risk management. And through this, I had a natural background on all the business side of things because that's literally like the stuff that I was dealing with on a daily basis on a really large scale inside of those banks. And so I really started to study like marketing, communication, pricing psychology, but also mindset, because that's what like really holds a lot of entrepreneurs back.
Mhm.
And we noticed something interesting happening. Our business at the functional pelvis started to really take off. So we started to find ways to market authentically in a non sleazy way. We started to attract our ideal client. We ended up with a wait list that was weeks long through all of the stuff that I was learning and implementing in the functional pelvis. But with all of that stuff that I was learning and implementing there, my other career in risk management also started to take off because
Mm.
there's really a lot of overlap in business at the end of the day, in business
Mhm.
psychology. So I started to get promoted a lot more. I was put in charge of managing global teams in New York City, London, and Hong Kong, and having to deliver these really high profile, high stress projects. And then over the years, with the success of the functional pelvis, we had more and more OTs reach out wanting to start their own OT private pay practice to get that treatment freedom, the money freedom, and more time freedom. And that demand really became so loud that I retired from finance and now just teach OTs full time how to start their own private pay practice using everything that I learned, implementing it in the functional pelvis and in my business career. And that business is called freedom of practice. Because what we really like to say is that OTs are best when they get to see who they want, when they want, where they want, and for as long as they want. You know, that to us is really treatment freedom, and that is freedom of practice. So it's a long story, but
Mhm.
that's all culminated in an online course and mentorship program called Private Pay MBA that's open to any OT and any specialty who just wants to pursue the private pay option.
Mm. I just love hearing that story, and I love the focus on private pay. Like, I look at the OT profession just like big picture, and I'm like, there will always be some of us working for the government, there will always be some of us working for insurance, but we really, really need this healthy entrepreneurial private pay sector,
Yeah.
partially because you guys are entrepreneurs. Like,
Yeah.
you're pushing us forward in areas like pelvic health that we haven't traditionally been a part of. And I think that's going to be true as telehealth opens more up. I can see
Yeah.
more and more specialty niches coming. And I think pelvic health was honestly just a pioneer. I think there's a lot more specialty niches to follow
Yes.
behind.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
the I'm thinking, so you're starting in 2013, I think you
Yeah.
said. 2023, to me, I look ahead and I'm like, this isn't the economic year I'm expecting. Like, it feels like any business news I hear is layoffs.
Is
Personally,
all
I
doom
see
and gloom, right?
inflation. Yes, yeah.
Yes.
What? I don't know. As you look at 2023, what are you thinking? Just big picture for OT entrepreneurship.
Well, I think, we have to put it kind of all in perspective because most people really think that to start a business, right, they need to take on an enormous amount of risk, right? And that
Hmm.
scares a lot of people. Then, you see it on TV, you see it on movies, and they have this idea that entrepreneurs are those that kind of just throw caution to the wind, burn their boats, put all their eggs in one basket, all the
Yep.
chips on the table, and kind of like bet the house, right?
Yep.
And when you see the stuff on the in the media now, you're like, well, now's not the time to do something like that,
Yeah.
right? But the problem is that initial narrative about the risk taking with business, I find really just isn't true. Most business owners do take risk, of course, right? But the most successful ones take very calculated risk where even if they're wrong, they're still okay. And so what I find is there's a really simple way to for OTs to do this when it comes to business. And that's just start on the side.
Hmm.
That is my recommendation to anyone at any time, but I think it's particularly important now. So you can work for someone else for 4 days a week and then focus on your business 1 day a week, right? And then as your business picks up, drop down to 3 days a week with working for someone else. And this is really, I didn't mention it in the introduction, but this is exactly what we did in the functional pelvis, right? We started slow, and there is just a ton to learn in the first year. And
Hmm.
having some of that income coming in, from your other job while you learn all the ins and outs of your business is extremely valuable, and it minimizes your risk. It gives you that cushion, right? And it gives you the money to invest continually back into your business. And the other thing you can do is you can see clients in their homes, right? Which minimizes the expenses of signing a lease. That's what we did, right? You could rent a room in an aligned practitioner space for 1 day a week without having to sign a long-term lease. So that's like a really simple way to do it to minimize your risk from the very beginning, regardless of the conditions. And I think it's also really important to know your numbers when it comes to pricing and the number of
Hmm.
clients you need to see. And many times I find that OTs are just surprised at how this all works out, right? You need to make sure that there's this alignment between what you want to earn and what you're charging and the number of people you can physically see in a day without burning out. And these three things have to be in harmony with one another. I actually filmed a whole YouTube video on how you can construct this with like a one-page simple business plan that walks you through it. And then there's one last thing I would say too, which is that it's really easy to get afraid of what's to come, right? If you listen to the news, they're constantly playing to our fears, but no one has a crystal ball when it comes to what's going to happen economically. They just don't, right? And if you let me ask you a question. So, Sarah, since World War II, what do you think the average length of an economic downturn has been?
Oh, after World War II, not
Yep,
including World War II,
after World War II.
4 years.
So it's really great that you said that because the average length of an economic downturn has only been 10 months.
Oh, whoa,
So,
that's not that
you know,
long.
it's not long at all, right? And it's not minimizing how painful those 10 months are, but these are boom and bust cycles that many times the fear is what holds people back versus the reality of what's going to happen. And those 10 months can be very painful, but every, economic downturn has been followed by another booming economic cycle, and that's all happened in a 10-month period. So I always say, like, you can use the next 10 months, the next 18 months to start something on the side, minimize your expenses, minimize your risk, and really be in a position to come out a lot stronger because we have to view, the building of the OT business as a 5 to 10 year plan, not
Hmm.
something that is going to have an overnight success in just, 3 months.
Yep. I've been starting to think, I've ran this by a couple people and they didn't fully agree with me, but I'm like, I almost wonder if every OT should have some small side hustle,
Yeah.
even like mitigating risk for those people who are in traditional businesses. Like
Right.
traditional healthcare is changing so much.
Yeah.
Like you should have this little safety net for yourself, or something happens in your family and you just can't go into your school setting. I like you think of entrepreneurship as risky, but in some ways it could be like mitigating a risk for you,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
No, exactly. Sometimes the biggest risk, I think, is doing nothing and
Hmm.
feeling like you're in a stable position where actually other people are calling the shots. And
Yeah.
so we had just the most recent incarnation of private pay NBA. We had somebody go through it because she was told at the beginning of October that at the end of October, she was being let go because she wasn't meeting some productivity standards.
Hmm.
So up until through September, she thought things were fine, but she wasn't really actually in control of
Yep.
her ability to earn income, and it could change on a dime. And that was finally the thing for her where she was like, okay, I have to get more control over my situation. So yes, there's a risk, but I have more say in the choices that I'm making, and I'm not gonna have someone pull the wool out of belief beneath my feet unexpectedly.
Yep. I feel like you're kind of like busting the myths of what we think top of mind as risks. But I think there's like some deeper risks that we undertake when we do entrepreneurship. I'm thinking like, what if I start a practice and no one comes? Like,
Yeah,
um, if you're, what are the true risks of entrepreneurship and what do you think really holds people back? I agree with you. I don't think it's the finances, but I do
right.
think there's risks that hold us back.
Yeah, so I kind of have actually a kind of a slightly unconventional thought about this, and because we've been entrepreneurs so long, it's not minimizing the risk of that you'll face as you become an entrepreneur, but I think the biggest risk is really not actually starting now. And
Hmm.
a lot of people wait for the perfect time or for the conditions to be totally right, right? But if you talk to someone who's just a little bit further down the road, they will pretty much always tell you that they're happy they started when they did, right? Instead
Hmm.
of waiting until they thought they had it all figured out. And that's just because there's no way that you can ever have it all figured out, right? That's just kind of a dream that we tell ourselves to get comfortable with delaying and taking it. So we started the functional pelvis when our second kid was just 6 weeks old, and our first kid was 2 years old. We had just moved from North Carolina to New York City. On the surface, it may seem crazy, but we mitigated that risk by starting part time and building it slowly. And it's easy to forget that during an economic pullback, that's when actually there's a lot of successful companies that have been created. So, Microsoft, Uber, Airbnb, Mailchimp, Warby Parker, the eyeglass company,
Hmm.
these were all founded either during or right after a recession. And I think it was Napoleon. He said that genius was defined by that person who can do the average thing when all those around him are going crazy. And that's why I think it's like useful to really put the fear in perspective, right? And in a proper context, because you can still make good decisions while everyone else is paralyzed. And healthcare traditionally is one of those areas that's fairly recession proof. And given the fact that it really only lasts for on average 10 months, you can really start focusing part time and learning how to attract clients and build up your relationships with the referral sources and grow slowly over the next,
Hmm.
10 or 18 months in 2023.
I've never thought of the analogy, or I'm hearing you talking, and it just sounds so much like investing. Like everyone
Yeah.
knows, like invest in your 20s and it'll grow so much more. And
Yeah.
I totally, that really clicks for me. That makes a ton of sense. The sooner you start invest, if you think of entrepreneurship as just investing in yourself, essentially,
Absolutely.
the sooner you do that, the better. And likewise, we also know like the best time to get in is during a recession when everything's on sale. Like
Exactly.
that's the again, this could be a great time to start something. Yeah,
Absolutely.
as you look ahead to 2023, what are those unique opportunities that are unique to this moment, unique to this year? Yeah.
Yeah. I I mean, I always like to go back to basics because I think the basics never really get old, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because trends can come and go, right? But good service, there's always a place for good service. There's always a place for being preeminent. There's always a place for giving more than you're receiving to build up goodwill in your community and be the leader in your community. So those are like real fundamental things that regardless of what niche you're in within OT, it's more of a philosophy of how you go about the business, right? That I
Mm-hmm.
think is really, really important that we always come back to. But I still think that the biggest opportunity is that more and more OTs are realizing that they actually have the power to create jobs for other OTs
Mm-hmm.
in an environment that looks after the OT, right? But also provides exceptional care to the clients. And the last few years have been incredibly tough in terms of burnout. So we've had OT seeing tons of patients every day, spending hours doing documentation, all while feeling like they can't make a change because of their bills, right? Like the student loan debt for OTs is incredibly high. And when I talk to other OTs, what they've told me is that they love being an OT, but the manner in which they're being asked to be an OT and practice an OT just doesn't work for them and their family.
Mm-hmm.
So I think OTs are more and more coming to the realization that they can't wait for someone else to improve their work environment. And that's led a lot more OTs to go down that entrepreneurial path, right? Where they're in charge. And I think that's only going to increase in 2023. So you have a lot more OTs who are really fed up with that status quo of
Mm-hmm.
being asked to practice, and they want to create that work environment for themselves and other OTs that they wish they could find at their current job. And they want to get paid a fair wage. They want to be able to pay off their student loans. They want to be able to save for retirement and just not go home exhausted at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's what's possible with private pay. And I think we're going to continue to see that trend go on and on. You mentioned it, and I think that's another big opportunity, which is the need to specialize. The
Yep.
world rewards specialization. So
Yep.
regardless of whether or not you become an OT entrepreneur or not, the more you can specialize, the better your working conditions are going to be, the better pay opportunities you're going to have. And I think you're just going to feel more fulfilled at the end of the day because of the types of clients you're working with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't see in 2023 people putting up an office on Main Street and being like, I'm the OT in town. I
Right.
see practices that are directed at specific niches. I'm a stroke therapist. I
Yes.
see support people with dementia.
Yeah.
Um, I focus
Doing
on
elder
POTS.
care.
Yep.
Yes.
And with our
Aging in
licensure
place.
compact, that I just keep thinking about our licensure compacts to be like, now I can see people in 7 states. Like, my market just expanded if I can
Yes.
claim the niche of something specific of
Yeah.
pelvic health of yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, it feels like the year of the niche practice for sure.
Absolutely. I think so. There's
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
always there's always demand in niches. And that
Mhm.
you hit the nail on the head, which is that is the number one way to differentiate yourself from everybody else and to build a protective moat around your
Yep.
business that really answers that question. We talk about it in the course, which is like, why should anybody choose you over and above all of your competitors, including the option of just doing nothing, which we
Mhm.
know is what most people do, right? They need something and they actually don't do the thing that they need. And the more you can define that for your niche, the more successful you're going to be.
Yeah. Why haven't we done that historically? I've been thinking about that like why don't I know like the ADHD therapist like
Yeah.
where I can or the vision OT that I can send people to like is
Yeah.
it because our license has been state by state and we've been tied too much to I don't know. Why aren't we there already? Like I think we need to get
Yeah.
there, but I'm kind of puzzled like is there some barrier I'm not seeing that we haven't done that?
I think
That's a
it's
very genuine
also,
question. It's
yeah,
not like leading.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's also the scope is so broad as
Hmm.
well. And I think a lot of times specialties aren't spoken about enough in school, right? In the same
Yeah.
way that entrepreneurship isn't spoken enough in school. So a lot of times what ends up happening is, people will get their first jobs out of OT school. And outside of Facebook groups and everything else, professionally who they're working around, it's kind of a game of telephone. When you've ever played that game of
Hmm.
telephone and one person's whispering to the next person. And so we're relying on all this to happen very organically within the community. And so I think there is a lot more momentum now to talk about specialties. There is a lot more momentum now to talk about entrepreneurship, but we're doing it in a very, very organic and really grassroots
Hmm.
manner. So, and that just takes time, I think.
Yeah. And so many of our settings force us into being generalists. If you're
Yep.
in acute care or at a school, working at a school, you on the job, you're not given the opportunity to gain a lot of confidence in one particular
Yes.
niche. So your work doesn't really set you up to do that. And then we're all
That's
just turning
exactly
our
right.
wheels and paying off our debt. And yeah, so
That's
I
exactly
guess that
right.
makes sense. But I'm ready for the new era of us for sure.
Me too. Me too.
Um, Something I think a lot about entrepreneurship, and honestly, I can't even answer it myself anymore because it's become such a blur. But to get started, where do we start? Is
Yeah.
it different now than it was 10 years ago? I know it's a very overwhelming process to think of all of the steps that need to happen to
Yeah.
seeing that first client.
Yeah.
Um, how do we
No,
start?
I mean, it is totally overwhelming. And
Yeah, it is.
yeah, it's so there's a couple of aspects to it. So in the work I do with OTs, a lot of times there's steps to the overwhelm, you know,
Yeah.
and the first step that I see a lot of times is a lot of people get overwhelmed on all of the business logistics stuff, right?
Mhm.
So this is like uh, getting your business type. Should you be a PLLC or an LLC? Your type 2 NPI number, opening the business bank account, all of these sorts of things, like these logistical things, can really stop a lot of people in their tracks
Mhm.
because it really just seems so foreign, right? And
Yeah.
super confusing. Every
Yep.
state is different, and people, rightly so, don't want to make a mistake. So, actually, on my website, freedomofpractice.com, we just have for free an entire 13-point checklist for all of these steps that you can download. It walks you through all the business logistics in the exact order in which you should do things because we really want to take the guesswork out of all of that because it's just logistics at the end of the day. And what we found is that, people put a lot of importance on those business logistics, but they won't in of themselves bring in any clients, right? The
Mhm.
logistics are really just there to make your OT private pay practice or whatever you're doing official, but it's not going to attract your clients. So I always like to take a step back, which is who are you serving? And so, what I really, and we talked about it a little bit, your niche. So, what I really like to have people do, and even people with established practices, many times have gone through our course and they've never even actually sat down to do this, which is define who their ideal client is. And it's
Mhm.
such, we hear it, people talk about it, and I think it's one of those things that's easy to brush off as unimportant, but it is one of the most important things you can do, which is define in a lot of detail who it is you're actually serving. And many OTs, because of their nature, want to help everyone within their
Yeah.
specialty,
Yeah.
but the more you can narrow it down, the more what problem you're solving for them, and really in particular why it's important to them, then the more successful you're going to be. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, we talked about it, but in private pay MBA, one of the exercises we have OTs do is to fill out just a simple statement, which is I help blank with blank so they can blank. And
Mm-hmm.
it seems so simple, but it's actually very, very difficult to get super specific on filling this out.
Yeah.
And the the more specific that you can make that, the better. It's really, really important because it focuses on who you want to attract to your practice. And what we found was the best way to attract people to clients is to use the language that resonates with them, right? Language that shows that you understand them. Everybody wants to be understood, that you know what they're going through, and language in such a manner that when they hear it, they raise their hand and they go, "Oh, that's for me," right? I could
Mm-hmm.
benefit from that. So I'll give you an example. So in our practice, we specialize in pelvic floor therapy for new moms. So my wife, she could have seen anyone with a pelvic floor, right? She could see women, she could see men, she could see athletes, see children, she could see older adults, right? Anyone with a pelvic floor, which is everyone, but that's
Mm-hmm.
too vague to attract anyone. So we started using language like this. We help new moms experiencing leaking while exercising get back to the activities they love without wearing pads. And that's hyper specific
Yep.
and focused. And once we started doing that, then when moms heard this, they immediately raised their hand and they were like, that's me, right? And we had so much more success doing that than something generic, which we see a lot, which is suffering from incontinence, book today, right? It's
Yeah.
just it's too generic to really be meaningful to people. And it's
I
and
don't
it's
want to
just
put
because
myself in that bucket either.
right. Yeah, people are just they're busy, right? Like
Yeah.
they want to get better, but they're just totally busy. And unless you can really spell it out for them and use that language that resonates with them, they're just going to move on. And
Mm-hmm.
you can do this with any OT specialty, right? You can
Yep.
get super specific, who you're going to serve, what is that language you're going to use to attract them, right? And that's really, I think, before you ever even register your entity, before you build your website, before you do any of that stuff, getting super hyper specific on that is the most important step that you can take to set yourself up for success.
Yeah. And it almost feels, I don't want to throw us under the bus, but that we have done a global disservice by not doing that because there are so many unmet needs there, so many
Yeah.
people who have that specific problem and no one's speaking to it.
Yeah.
Um, Big
Well,
swaths of people that have, yeah, those kind of needs, and we
yeah.
haven't spoken specifically to that. Um,
Well, and
yeah,
I
it's
think
almost like it feels to me like a moral imperative. Like there's great treatments, there's great evidence.
yes.
We have those skills. We have to be connecting better than we have historically in different ways. The same old ways
Yes.
are not working. They didn't serve a lot of people. We can't wait
Yes.
till people get to the hospital. Like
Right.
that's a total disservice to our
Yeah.
society.
And I think the more we can connect with people where they are, I find that it's really easy to resort to very clinical language, to very language that you would be comfortable speaking to another OT about
Hmm.
versus what you would call like the layperson language and what they're experiencing. And I think sometimes we can feel like, well, to sound professional, to sound like we've earned the degree, to sound like we earn the letters after our name, we always have to speak in a professional textbook manner. But that's really what I find the curse of knowledge, right? You know so much
Hmm.
more
Yep.
than your client does. Like you're here, they're here, and yes, we need to get them here, but the way we do that is first taking a step back and meeting them where they are,
Right there.
and then taking them there. And we do this. You can do this in a great way with the exercises, with the just right challenge and everything, but you apply that same mentality to the language you use to attract them in the first place. And we've seen a lot of success with OTs just flipping that script and going, oh, okay, actually I do have permission to use language that resonates directly with them without always having to sound super official and businessy.
Hmm. Yeah, all this just makes me so excited for 2023 to I just hope we see this surge of people doing what you're talking about. I think it's so needed. Yeah, what's the final thought or sending that you want to leave us on?
Yeah, I mean, I think just don't let fear hold you back. I mean, there are people who need what you have to offer, and you have really everything already inside you to actually be able to do this. You know, you've gone through OT school, you've gone through undergrad. You don't need permission from anyone to do it. You don't need another advanced degree. You don't need another certification course. You know, experience is really the best teacher, and you can do these things on the side, and it's absolutely within your power to make that happen.
Well, thank you so much, Doug. This has been super inspiring, and I'm excited to talk again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah.